Real, relevant radio. Kingfisher FM.
Good day. You are tuned to Your Financial Journey, where planning matters. Brought to you by Risk-Free Solutions, an accredited Old Mutual Agency franchise, with Vernon DeVos and Ethan Black. The show that helps you make quality decisions and thrive. Unpack your future and make it better. Every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. right here on 107.5 FM.
Lovely to have Vernon back in studio with us every single Thursday at 4:30, connecting with him from Risk-Free Solutions, looking at a sort of a systematic approach at financial planning and making some of those important decisions. You can't do it without the advice, and make sure that advice is good and sound. You can get in touch with Risk-Free. Vernon, hi.
Hey, Ethan, how are you doing?
Lekker, man, lekker.
It's good to be in studio with you again.
Yeah, we come to the end of the year,
I know.
And I guess we haven't even had a chance to think back over what 2020 has been. I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around it from a financial perspective. I think it's been very difficult for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And talking about how quickly things move, it feels like it was yesterday I was in studio talking to you, and now it's a week has gone by and we're back. So, yeah, life seems to be moving at quite a pace. But, I think one of the things that we want to talk about today is budgeting and the importance of budgeting. I've got Jaco Steenberg. Jaco's one of my senior advisors. He's been with me for 15 years. In fact, he was one of the guys that started out with me when we started the franchise, and he's been with me ever since. And Jaco's built up a huge client base. So he's got a lot of experience when it comes to dealing with clients and talking them through their finances. And we've got him on the line. He's actually based in Kimberely in the Northern Cape, so he's going to be talking to us all the way from Kimberley. Obviously, he's on the line. So good to have Jaco with us. Hi, Jaco.
Hi, Vernie. Hi, Ethan. Hi, everybody. How are you doing?
No, doing well. Can't complain.
Yeah, listen, thanks for taking time today, Jaco. Just from your side, I know you wanted to unpack a little bit about budgeting and that whole thing, but I guess putting it in the context of a story is going to just make it that much more easy for us to understand.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Ethan. I want to say right off the bat, I'm going to talk to you guys, and obviously the listeners, that I'm talking to you guys from my personal perspective. I don't represent in this context, I don't represent anybody else other than myself. I'd like to keep it that way, informal in that chat. And Vernon has just, mentioned about my past. If you guys want me to, I can talk a bit about where we actually went back, way back, long before Old Mutual. Vernon started in 1997. I started the year thereafter. And in a manner of speaking, Vernon and I have been married for all that time. And if I didn't love him the way I love him, I would have divorced him long, long ago. But like a pair of old shoes, we've gotten accustomed to each other since then. And but yes, we've been together for a long while. And talking about a story, you guys wanted me to relay something. When I got invited, I actually thought, what would I talk about that will actually make sense to a lot of people? But then I brought it home. I brought it home to my own personal experience, specifically 2020. My wife, look, we all know about COVID, we all know about lockdown and all that, but we got an extra, I would call it a riptide. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer on the 21st of July this year. And it was quite a shock. I couldn't go in with her to the tests and all that. I waited for her in the corridor, and when she came out, I immediately knew something was wrong. They immediately said they ushered us into go to our doctor, our family doctor, and all that. Went from there, went to the surgeon, and we did a couple of tests, this, there, and the other. No, it is diagnosed. So fortunately, it was diagnosed early. My wife, she was very prudent in her approach, and that was the reason why we got to be in that fortunate position that it was diagnosed very, very early on. So fast forward to the oncologist after the surgery, after the 6-week recovery and all that. Now we're sitting in his office, and there was a long discussion. I mean, oncology, I only discovered this, there's no substitute for experience. I only discovered it after we experienced this, that unlike the other disciplines in medicine, oncology is a very structured approach. And what happens is that if you have this type of cancer and it's at this stage and you're in the age band between this and this age, then the treatment options are prescribed as this, and it's apparently it's standardized all over the world. So if you go into India, Europe, America, South Africa, wherever you go, you'll get the standard treatment. But now, in my wife Anel's case, it was at a nice age. She's young. I mean, she only turned 40 last year. The type of cancer is an estrogen, it's my layman's terms, it's an estrogen receptive cancer. I'm not going to go through all the subjects, but the point being that the oncologist, it was either we're going to go with chemotherapy or not. But during his talk, he mentioned a test that was done, but very briefly, that apparently this test it was done in America, and that will give us clarity, but because the medical aids don't pay for it, he just jumped over it and went on. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him, I said, please go back to that test. What does that entail? And he said, oh, you know what, this test, it costs for 24,000 Rand. What they basically do is they take a section of the breast tissue that was cut out. They send it to America. They do a bank of tests. And in my layman's terms, they come back with answers to two main questions. The main questions are, well, what is the probability that this cancer will actually return? And then secondly, what is the probability that chemotherapy will actually have an effect on this patient? So for the long-term prognosis and after the 15 years initial period. Now, he said, okay, I looked at my wife and she looked at me and I said, yes, go for the test. But as it turned out, because of the exchange rate and because of lockdown and all these things, it almost doubled the installment, which we still pay, because once you make the decision, you've got 48 hours to make the payment. Otherwise, they sue you for a fine. You cannot commit and then pay after the fact. You have to pay up front. Obviously, you understand, because of the expenses involved. So we did that. It came back, and without going into too much detail, on a scale of 1 to 100, you're looking to be between 1 and 15 for both those answers. And she came back, her test results came back at a 1.62, if memory serves right, and a 1.26 for the other one. So we are very fortunate in both instances. So that immediately gave us clarity as to what the next steps need to be. In other words, no, she does not have to go for chemotherapy, and yes, she only has to go for the radiotherapy, which in itself is a heavy situation. But okay, why am I telling this entire story? Why am I relaying this? Is because of the following. My pa sê altyd, 'n skoenmaker se kinders het nooit skoene nie. But in this instance, I followed my own advice, and I kept a budget by myself for many years now. And part of my budget is to put money aside every month for unforeseen events. Now, if you look at the averages of South Africa, the population and all that, I'm in a very fortunate position that I could, when the riptide came and it pulled us down, I could actually say, you know what, I do have money set aside, take that money and pay it so that we can have clear direction going forward. But I would not have had that had I just lived like everybody around me, all the what we see as the norm. not just in South Africa, but throughout the world. I've got friends all over the world, and regularly we talk, and this thing comes up from time to time, and it's always the same. No, don't worry, tomorrow will take care of itself. No, you've got to take care of yourself for tomorrow. So I'm going to leave it at that. You guys can ask questions or whatever, and then we can go on.
Sure, it's a very personal story. So thanks for sharing that with us, Jaco.
You got to be personal. Madonna said to express yourself is to expose yourself, and I just thought, you know what? If it can mean something for anybody out there, I'm gonna lay my heart on the line here. So yeah.
Yeah, and maybe from a budgeting point of view, maybe we can talk a bit more about that, Jaco.
Yeah.
And talk about what steps you took to be able to put money away, to be able to save for that rainy day, or, in our terms, we call it an emergency fund, when you need money because something's happened that's not budgeted for, and it jumps out at you and you need to be able to access it. How did you go about doing that?
Okay, again, I was very fortunate. I've been in the industry. You see, Vinny, how long have we? I think it's 22, going on 23 years. So I've had a lot of experience learning out of other people's mistakes. So for many years, I've done exactly that. I've put a budget to play, and I'll quickly talk about that in a moment's time. But how did I go about it? And that's one of the main things, that you've got to live within your means. And living within your means is at the end of every month, you've got money in your account. No, that's not what it means to live within your means. It means that you have got to live well below what your income is. And a lot of people don't understand what the difference between income and an asset is, for example. But we're not going to go into that. That's a bit more detailed. But how do I compile my own budget? Well, it's very simple. Perhaps that will help. I
think from a practical point of view, I think, to the listeners out there, if they're listening to you and they need some practical advice on budgeting, what would be your 2 or 3 key message to them?
Before we get to that budget, I would practically say, get your mind right and say, it is my responsibility. I believe this thing firmly, that life on earth is suffering, but it's not just supposed to be suffering. But for you to be able to put yourself in a position that you do not suffer unnecessarily, you've got to use what God gave you, meaning your brain. You've got to use it. And practically, what does that mean? If you don't have a budget, before we even start about getting it, get your mind right to say, I'm going to live my best life, because money is supposed to serve you. You're not supposed to run after money all the time and worry all the time. So practically, you've got to get your mindset right, that you're saying, I'm going to take responsibility for myself, for my own life. If you are somebody that has a family, that's fortunate enough to have a family, you've got to take responsibility for your family as well. We talk about all the time about the sandwich generation. People in South Africa have got not only to take care of themselves, but also their parents and the siblings around them. So budgeting is then all the more crucial. So practically, what does it start? Where does it start? It starts with that decision in your mind to say, I'm going to take responsibility. Second step is, if you don't have a budget, just go to your bank statement. These days, everything is on the internet. And list your expenses and say, what did I buy here for the past 3 months, or whatever period you want to take in time. List your expenses. And 9 times out of 10, when I do that exercise with my clients, there's no other way to say it, they are ashamed, because they spend money like drunken sailors a lot of the time. And I'm not being facetious to my clients. I'm not being nasty to them. But people in South Africa, they don't take their finances serious enough to say, oh, you know what, it's just a coffee at the coffee shop, or it's just a croissant, or it's just an extra pair of shoes. I'm not going to... I had this one client, literally, she had a house. She had in her house, she had one room just for shoes, but that's a different story. We're not going to go there. Ladies need their shoes. Okay, so you list your expenses, and then you go and structure, and you see, wow, what is necessary in your own mind, and then what can I do away with? What can I lower and all that? And then you that's the point where you start. You've got to start. You can't start in the air. You've got to start with a place that is practical, that is real to you. What are real expenses? And then you say, okay, where I'm here now, but where do I want to be? In other words, I don't want to pay off a credit card or a personal loan for the rest of my life, because that's the way. Once you get trapped in that area, the banks want to keep you there. And again, banks have their place. Banks have their place in society to fill, but they can't keep you trapped forever. They can't, literally you are working to pay taxes and interest to the loans. No, that's not a good space to be. So then you've got to say, where do I want to end up? Draw the best case scenario budget for yourself. And then in between those two, you work and you give yourself time. You can't fix this thing in 3 months. You can, if you are in debt with personal loans, with credit card, with a bond, with vehicle finance, you've got to afford yourself time. Don't become despondent. You've got to resolute in your mind to say, I'm going to move from where I am to where I want to be, even if it takes me 5 years or 7 years a period. The longest that it took one of my clients was 7 years, where she was completely in debt. And then 7 years later, she actually owned her own home. Obviously, she owned it, and she was approximately halfway paid off on that home, where she didn't own anything on her name on day one. And she had debt, personal loans, 2 personal loans, and all of these things. And that was about 10 years ago. And approximately 3 years ago, she owned her own home, and that was the only debt that she had. She had a vehicle that was on her name, and a lot of things. So you've got to give yourself time, and that's the thing. People get distracted. So you need things to put in place to remind you where you are headed, and you've got to take responsibility for that.
Jaco, that's fantastic advice. I think a lot of people can take away something from what you've said now. And certainly, I'm sure people are going to be, wanting to contact Risk-Free Solutions and say, come and have a conversation with me. Talk to me. I need a good, stern talking to, and I need sound advice as to how to put it into place and look at time frames, how to manage that as well, and not to, as you say, grow despondent. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and then we just want to quickly touch on, you mentioned this traumatic experience, the severe illness that sort of blindsided you, and that happens to everybody. Life happens, and you get blindsided. And just to quickly touch on how much a person needs to bring that into the budget, that planning as well. We'll be back in a moment. Risk-Free Solutions.
You are listening to Your Financial Journey, where planning matters. Brought to you by Risk-Free Solutions, an accredited Old Mutual Agency franchise. The show that helps you make quality decisions and thrive.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day, making quality decisions. Joining us on the line this afternoon, all the way from Kimberly, is Jaco Steenberg in studio with me, Vernon de Vos from Risk-Free Solutions. Vernon?
Yes, and it's great to have Jaco with us. Jaco, thank you for sharing and also giving us insight into your journey, but maybe more on a practical level. You spoke about putting money away. Maybe when did you start putting money away? What was your plan when you started putting money away with that emergency fund? How did you do it? Maybe just talk us through that, Jaco.
Okay, thanks, Vinny. Thank you for the opportunity again. I'm going to try and keep it very plain and simple. There are different ways in which you can invest and all that, but when it comes to an emergency fund, it's exactly that. It's an emergency fund. Now, practically, what I did, and again, I'm saying there are other avenues that I also use, but that's for different purposes. For this specific purpose, the emergency fund, there are basically two ways that I do it. I've got no other debt than my bond that I hope to pay off much sooner than what the bank wants me to pay it off. But I've got a debit order that runs, and it runs on a specific amount. I don't just pay over what the bank wants me to pay over. I've got a fixed amount, so I always have extra money in my bond on hand that I can, with my app on my phone or internet banking, that I can easily transfer between the bond account into my day-to-day account. And if there's something wrong, like for example, it might not be something as heavy as
Jaco, maybe just to clarify.
It might be the tires that you need to replace on your vehicle before you go on holiday, something like that. So I always pay extra money into my bond. But another way is my dad, many years ago, he said, as je geld wegzet, je moet vergeet van dit. Now, I never accepted that because, you can't forget about it, because if you don't keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening to your money, it might not be a good investment. The money might actually decrease in value. So I never subscribed to that until I entered my 30s. That's many moons ago. But and then I started to realize what he actually meant. He said that if you're talking about an emergency fund, you put that away. You don't necessarily want that money to grow. That's not the purpose of it. You just want it to be there, ready and willing and able to help you if time comes. So what I did was I opened up a separate savings account. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, the bank's name, but I bank with a specific bank, and it was very easy. I set up a savings account on the side, and a normal, again, like a stop order or debit order, in Afrikaans is an aftrek order, that I instituted on a specific day of every month. 1,000 rand pays into that account. And I always, it's one of the accounts that's listed on my home screen on my app, and I can see where the money goes and how it actually. There's a little bit of growth, but that's not the purpose of it. It's money put aside. So if I must speak practically, it's two ways that I put this emergency money to the side. That was in my home loan, that I put in extra money, and in my savings account specifically for emergencies that I ran, and I never touched that money unless it is a real emergency. If the ladies are listening, a shoe sale is not an emergency. And guys, a car is definitely not an emergency if you can get a good deal on it.
Jaco,
you've got to make a business decision there. So,
Jaco, just tell us how much, percentage-wise or whatever, should be in there. Should we have a few months saved up, or what?
Ideally, look, again, we're talking not today, we're talking the target, where you want to end up in a year or two's time. In South Africa, with our situation here, I think you need to have a target that over a period of maybe 2 years, if you diligently save up, you should have at least 3 months your gross income, at least 3 months saved up there. Ideally, it would be something like 6 months, but that might be a stretch for everybody. But ideally, 3 months. I think that should be enough, because if you need more money than that, it's a bigger emergency than that. Then you can always go to your bank and organize something. But for a specific amount, I would say no less than 3 months your gross income.
I would imagine per family member.
I would look, when you're talking per family member, I would say per family member for the person that runs the household. We quickly referred about the sandwich generation. If there's one person that earns the income for that family, and they all live in the same house or two houses adjacent, then I would say go for 6 months, but for that person, that individual's income, because then that person has got to stand very firm. You see, when we talk family members, now you've got to say the needs now. Okay, the best advice I can give you is to get good advice. Go to somebody that knows, because the situation will differ from person or group of people to another group of people. If you're sitting with a single parent with one child and a grandmother, I've got a couple of those clients. My advice would be different for those people than husband, wife, 2 kids. Would be different to Umi and Tani, grandparents that live on their own. They don't have any other liabilities and stuff. So I would give different advice, different perspectives on that individual situation. But generally speaking, no less than 3 months. Okay. That should be your target.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. And Jaco, as far as the bond goes, obviously you have to make sure you have an access bond. If you don't have an access bond, it's obviously very difficult to save. So you need to chat to your bank or to your financial advisor and just get some advice, because you don't want to think you're saving in your bond and you don't have access to it. So it's important to have that
Dot
discussion.
the I's, cross the T's type of scenario. We're going to have to leave it there, Jaco. But I would love to have you back in on the phone.
In the new year.
In the new year, sure. And just to unpack a little bit more about your story, your personal journey, and also to bring in, for those emergencies, to have an emergency fund, but also in this scenario you were talking about illness and how that can be budgeted for, and people can make plans towards that going into the new year and over time.
I'd love to come back. I'd love to do that. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate that, and we really wish you and your wife health and blessings going into 2021. May it be a complete recovery.
Health is wealth. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and thank you once again for the time, and all of the best to you guys. Drive safely, and then we'll see each other or hear each other in the new year.
Awesome. Thanks, Jaco.
Thanks, Jaco.
All right, that's it from our side. Vernon, thanks so much.
Yes,
for,
thank you, Ethan.
The
you.
opportunity for us to unpack a little bit around budgeting and to make wise choices.
Perfect, thank you.
We'll join you again next week, Thursday. Don't miss it.
You have been listening to Your Financial Journey, where planning matters. Brought to you by Risk-Free Solutions, an accredited Old Mutual Agency franchise. Tuning weekly to the show that leads the way so that no one gets left behind. Every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. right here on 107.5 FM.
Your motivation station. This is Kingfisher FM.